In 2023, Australia will mark the 50th anniversary of a historic event that changed its relationship with China and the world. In 1973, Prime Minister Gough Whitlam became the first Australian leader to visit China and meet with Chairman Mao Zedong and Premier Zhou Enlai. This visit followed Whitlam's groundbreaking trip to China in 1971 as the opposition leader, when he defied the Cold War orthodoxy and advocated for diplomatic recognition of the communist regime. Whitlam's vision and courage paved the way for Australia to establish formal ties with China in 1972, shortly after his election victory. Whitlam's visit to China was not only a diplomatic breakthrough, but also a cultural and personal one. He was accompanied by his wife Margaret, who charmed the Chinese people with her warmth and curiosity. The Whitlams visited historical sites, attended cultural performances, and mingled with ordinary citizens. They also witnessed the early stages of China's opening up and modernization under Deng Xiaoping, who later became the paramount leader of China and a key interlocutor for Australia. Whitlam's visit to China was widely praised at home and abroad as a visionary and pragmatic move that enhanced Australia's standing in the region and the world. It also coincided with the end of the Vietnam War, which Whitlam had opposed as a futile and immoral intervention. Whitlam's visit to China signaled a new era of engagement and cooperation between Australia and its Asian neighbours, based on mutual respect and common interests. 50 years later, Australia faces a very different and more challenging relationship with China. The rise of China as a global power has brought both opportunities and tensions for Australia, especially in the areas of trade, security, human rights, and regional influence. The Morrison government has adopted a more confrontational and critical stance towards China, which has resulted in diplomatic disputes, economic sanctions, and public mistrust. The COVID-19 pandemic has also exacerbated the rift between the two countries, as Australia has called for an independent inquiry into the origins of the virus and supported Taiwan's participation in the World Health Organization. In this context, Anthony Albanese's visit to China in 2023 could be a historic opportunity to reset and recalibrate the bilateral relationship. Albanese, who became Prime Minister after defeating Scott Morrison in the 2022 federal election, has expressed his support for a constructive and respectful engagement with China, while also defending Australia's values and interests. Albanese has also acknowledged the legacy of Whitlam's visit to China and its significance for Australia's foreign policy. Albanese's visit to China could coincide with the 50th anniversary of Whitlam's historic trip to China as Prime Minister, and what that means for the bilateral relationship is that it could provide a chance to reflect on the past achievements and challenges of the relationship, as well as to explore new areas of cooperation and dialogue for the future. Albanese could pay tribute to Whitlam's vision and courage in reaching out to China at a time when it was isolated and misunderstood by most of the Western world. He could also recognize the contributions of successive Australian leaders who have maintained and developed the relationship with China over the decades, such as Malcolm Fraser, Bob Hawke, Paul Keating, John Howard, Kevin Rudd, Julia Gillard, Tony Abbott, Malcolm Turnbull, and Scott Morrison. Albanese could also address the current issues and difficulties that have strained the relationship with China in recent years. He could reaffirm Australia's commitment to a rules-based international order that respects human rights, democracy, sovereignty, and multilateralism. He could also acknowledge China's legitimate interests and aspirations as a rising power that seeks greater respect and influence in global affairs. He could emphasize the need for dialogue and cooperation on common challenges such as climate change, health security, terrorism, cybercrime, nuclear proliferation, and regional stability. He could also highlight the benefits of trade and investment between the two countries, as well as the people-to-people links that enrich both societies. Albanese's visit to China could be an opportunity to restore trust and confidence between the two countries. It could also be a chance to celebrate the achievements of 50 years of diplomatic relations between Australia and China. And it could be a moment to honor the legacy of Gough Whitlam, who opened a new chapter in Australia's history with his visionary visit to China in 1973. How Anthony Albanese's visit to China could help resolve the trade disputes and secure the release of 2 Australians detained in China on national security charges. Anthony Albanese has announced his intention to travel to China in the near future, a move that could mark a turning point in the strained relationship between Canberra and Beijing. The Prime Minister has said that he wants to have a constructive dialogue with China and address the issues that have caused tensions and mistrust in recent years. One of the most pressing issues is the trade dispute that has seen China impose punitive tariffs and bans on a range of Australian exports, including barley, wine, beef, coal and timber. These measures have cost Australian producers billions of dollars and hurt many regional communities. China has justified its actions by accusing Australia of dumping cheap products on its market and violating its trade agreements. However, Australia has rejected these claims and challenged some of them at the World Trade Organization, WTO, arguing that China is breaching its international obligations and discriminating against Australian goods. In April, Australia reached a deal with China over the barley dispute, which could pave the way for China to drop its tariffs without losing face. Anthony Albanese has said that he wants to see all trade sanctions lifted before he visits Beijing, and he has the support of the opposition on this demand. The Prime Minister has also said that he will not compromise on Australia's values or interests, such as its sovereignty, security and human rights. Another issue that Anthony Albanese will raise with China is the fate of 2 Australians who have been detained in China for more than a year on vague national security charges. They are Cheng Lei, a journalist who worked for Chinese state media, and Yang Hengjuan, a writer and democracy activist. Both have been denied access to their lawyers and families, and face lengthy prison sentences if convicted. Australia has repeatedly called for their release and fair treatment, but China has accused Australia of interfering in its internal affairs and judicial system. Anthony Albanese has said that he will continue to make representations to China on behalf of the 2 Australians, and that their situation is not acceptable. By visiting China, Anthony Albanese hopes to break the diplomatic deadlock and restore some trust and cooperation between the 2 countries. He has said that he welcomes China's economic growth and development, but also expects it to act responsibly and respectfully on the global stage. He has also said that he wants to work with China on common challenges such as climate change, regional security and pandemic recovery. Anthony Albanese's visit to China could be a historic opportunity to reset the relationship and resolve some of the outstanding issues that have plagued it for years. However, it will also require courage, patience and compromise from both sides, as well as support from Australia's allies and partners.